Welcome to Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Christensen. Look, you know that between the latest online fads and the crazy media headlines, it's easier than ever to get confused about your health. And you and I just want to feel better and live longer. We want to know what works. And we can't wait for further studies. We need to make decisions today based on the best evidence we've got. Well, that's exactly what this show is here for. So let's get to it. Hey, Dr. C here. Welcome back to another episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. You know, if you don't sit up straight, you will wreck your back and cause neck pain and all kinds of stuff. It's actually not true. So posture, however, in your movement is super important, but not in a lot of the ways that you might think. And it doesn't have to be something that requires vast amounts of your precious time. If you do it well, you might even be able to bundle in a lot of the benefits of exercise and meditation with the kind of stuff you're doing already, just moving around throughout the day. To make sense of all this, I brought my friend Aaron Alexander. He's a manual therapist, movement coach, about 16 years of professional experience. He's worked with all the A-class Hollywood celebs to pro athletes and all kinds of others. He has a book out called The Align Method. We talked about a couple of the key concepts in this, and Aaron's a great resource on all things movement and biomechanics. So yeah, hope you enjoy this time with Aaron. So the myth is about you got to sit up straight or else you're going to wreck your back. So yeah, help us unpack that. What's the real evidence around posture, how it pertains to back? And then afterwards, I want to talk a lot about your new book, The Align Method. We can learn about improving our health through alignment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so pain is one of the, I'm pretty darn confident I'll be spending the rest of my life looking into understanding what pain actually is and where it comes from. And I don't know if I'll ever actually get to the bottom of it. And most of the smartest people that you talk to, you know, in the end, if you're in the bar having a drink, they're like, we don't know what the heck is going on here.
Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. You know? And so, but what seems like there's a consistent trend is that as we aggregate stress throughout our lives, then that will eventually manifest into some form of like a flare signal going up that like we need to work with this. Something needs to change. And so a commonly held belief would be that, you know, if you have that text neck, forward head, upper cross syndrome, rolled forward shoulders, you know, that postural pattern, your head's kind of jutting forward and your shoulders are collapsing forward, then of course you're going to have neck pain because you're crimping the hose there. But from what most of the research says, that's not actually true. So I have like some bullet points of different research that I won't just spend the whole time reading, but just a few standouts. No difference in lumbar lordosis or leg length discrepancy inequality in 321 males with either severe, moderate, or no back pain. No association between neck pain and neck curvature in 107 people over the age of 45. I'll just read one more. No significant difference in lumbar curve, pelvic tilt, leg length discrepancy, and the length of abdominal, hamstring, and iliopsoas muscle in 600 people with and without back pain. You know, so there's a lot of different research around that. I'm getting this actually out of a friend's book called Playing with Movement, Todd Hargrove, and he was kind enough to kind of break down a list and a whole chapter about this. And then there's all the resources we can link to in the show notes. But, so your mechanics is, I'm not discrediting mechanics. And like the Align Method book is like a user's manual on how to integrate more effective mechanics into your life and what that means and why that matters. But it's just one of the buckets of potential stress. And so if you're in a position that is disadvantageous to allow gravity to move through you, for example, for you to your joints to stack on top of each other and in relationship to each other. And when you're picking up your child and holding them in a position that might be closing down and impinging your shoulder or activating certain muscles around the neck that may or may not put you into more of like a autonomic stressed state. All of that is associated. But then beyond that, there's the environmental conditions of maybe the deodorants that you're using that may be causing some type of endocrine disruption, or perfumes, or the food that's it's your favorite treat that you're actually completely allergic to is creating inflammation in and around your joints or in your brain, which is associated with depression. So the conversation of movement is so much bigger than just what was the form of my bicep curls and my muscle ups. You know, movement literally is every aspect of your life. And that pain question is wrapped up in all of that.
You know, you've gone so deep into, the exact positioning and movement patterns of the body and how they affect all facets of health. And what first draw you into that?
I think deep insecurity and general fear of maybe lack of acceptance or just feeling kind of like unsafe in the world in general, which translated to packing on as much muscle in as short a period of time as possible as a 15, 16-year-old kid. And that led into, just bodybuilding and just obsessing over it, focusing on the glamour muscles and, the beach muscles. And so essentially, like, if I could see it in the mirror, we needed to jack it up. We needed hypertrophy and, protein, and we needed to pump that thing up. And then eventually that's, kind of gets into like all this is everything's metaphoric for everything else, and how you do anything is how you do everything. And so by not focusing on the parts that I could not see in the mirror, all of a sudden this gross imbalance starts to manifest. And then eventually things like chronic pain and some anxiety and then actual injuries began manifesting themselves. And then there's like a process of like, okay, it seems like my parts, I feel like I'm kind of living my physical / mental emotional life in somewhat of like a knot. What's the process on starting to parse this knot apart and kind of put things back together in a little bit more of like an integrated fashion? And that's been the journey for the last while.
It's funny, you mentioned just a couple, but there's so many examples of how we juxtapose language about physical tension, discomfort, and emotional states. Being knotted up, being tense, being stressed. We use those things across the board in so many ways.
Yeah. I mean, our language shapes us and forms us, and we have a belief system around age, for example, where it's like presently, if you look at norms and statistics, like Mark Twain has a quote about statistics. He says that there's lies, damn lies, and then there's statistics. And so it's like, I think that we can paint the picture of the world in whatever fashion we choose. I can Google search literally anything right now and be confirmed that I was right. So your perspective on the world literally shapes your physical structure, and so presently the world, our physical structure, and then vice versa. And so the structure of the modern world is such that, the chairs that we sit in and the cell phones that we stare into and the computer screens that we gaze at and the TVs and then the couch and then the dinner table and then the seated row machine and workout machines we do at the gym and then the 90-degree hip hinge for the toilet that we sit on, as opposed to going through that deep full squat that elongates the rectum and has been an evolutionary tuning mechanism since the beginning of forever for humans. We leave those and we go into this mold that forms us into a way. It's not a good or a bad thing. It just forms us into the way that it does. And if you look at, there's a really cool photographer that he took out the cell phone. He like photoshopped the cell phone out from a bunch of different people. So like couples lying in their bed, looking at the phone, and people hanging out at the bus and whatnot. And consistently throughout all of the photos, you're like, man, these people look sad. Like these people look like they're like if you didn't know, you're like hunter-gatherer ancestor, you'd go up and be like, hey buddy, like what's going on? Like, how can I help? Like, are you okay? And you look at depression is the number one leading cause of disability worldwide. It's like, like, is there a mechanical conversation there? I would say like, absolutely. And then how we started that was the words and the belief systems. I think that I heard this literally yesterday at the gym. Like the guy's talking about doing jujitsu, and he's like, "Oh man, I'm just so old, and I'm trying to keep up with these young guys, and like I'm all right for an old guy." I'm like, "Why are you putting yourself in that container, man? Like you're all right for a man, for a human, like take yourself out of this limiting belief system." And we do that with injuries as well. You get an injury, you get a bum knee or something like that when you're 15 in high school football, and all of a sudden you're still talking about that bum knee when you're 40 years old. And it's like, we can perpetuate those patterns and keep ourselves inside of boxes, or we can start to kind of bend those boxes a little bit. But first we have to step back and realize that we're kind of living inside of a box.
So of the movement patterns that we fall into in modern life, like what are some of the big consequences that people might not associate with that, but really could be?
Yeah. Well, so in the book, we break down 5 postural archetypes. That in the version you saw, you didn't see the art that goes with it. So each of them I had an artist create like what that looks like, and there's like squiggly lines and stuff to represent the emotion and all that. And you see, one of them is the mopey archetype, which I described as essentially kind of like hunching over, looking at your phone, sitting on a bench at a bus. You're kind of like, oh, if you didn't know about the phone, you'd be like, oh, it looks kind of sad. What we see is there's like the Amy Cuddy research in Harvard that's been kind of going back and forth of being refuted, and then she reclaims it. And but she correlated. It was the second most popular TED Talk, I think, in history. But from her research, she showed that there's a physiological effect on just being in a hunched over position for just a couple minutes. That cortisol levels would change; they would go up, and then testosterone would decrease. And essentially, like, you go into like, okay, like we've anchored ourselves, which is a neurolinguistic programming term. We're continually anchoring ourselves with maybe certain music that we might hear, anchoring that to an emotion. We're also anchoring ourselves to certain postural patterns. So if you are in a certain position 100 times and you feel a certain way consistently in that position, then when you go into that position, you're training yourself, kind of like Pavlov dog stuff, like the dog salivates when he hears the bell. Your body, your postural patterns will salivate in a sense like the dog when they go into certain positions, because they know that this is an indication. When Dr. C was sad because his girlfriend broke up with him when he was 16, or it's the same position I was in when I was fired, it's the same position. Every time life was challenging, or a little sad or depressive, I was in that position. So now when I go into that, my body has this memory of like, okay, cool, this is where we're at. And it's a similar thing with an anxious position. It's a similar thing with a proud position. It's a similar thing with any of them. And so people can tangibly recognize this when they hear a certain song that is like, okay, cool. Before I go into my football game or my public speaking thing or see a client or whatever, I'm like, I play that song and it pumps me up and it puts me in a good spot. Well, that's because you've anchored that state to that song. But we are also doing that from a mechanical perspective. You could do that from a lot of different ways. Smells are the same thing. So again, it's like mechanics is not the end all of everything. It's just one of the buckets, but it's one that we, for the most part, never really get a strong education on how to wield effectively.
That's really cool. So there's all these ways by which things work bidirectionally.
Correct.
We have feelings and states that affect how our posture is, and then vice versa. The posture can revisit that.
That's correct.
And you're saying that so many things that we do without there being any intent towards eliciting a state still can elicit these states.
Yeah, that's it. And the big thing is just we don't ever get education in school. Like phys ed is like hucking kickballs at each other's faces and like running around bases. You're like, okay, you're like phys ed. Like phys ed ought to be something that is a foundation to literally every class that you walk into. And it should be as you're walking through the hallway, and it should be as you're waking up, and as you're getting on the bus, or maybe walking to school instead, or riding a bike. But that's because when we communicate to each other and we're educating or being educated, the way that we do that is through our movement. So the tone of our voice, the pacing of our language, our body language, the clothes that we wear, all these different forms of signaling, which you referred to in the elephant in the brain book, like these conspicuous patterns that we do. Our health is a form of, having conspicuous health. What I was doing with my muscles, I was packing on as much muscle as I could to conspicuously show people that I was big enough, strong enough, all those things, fertile enough. We just don't get that education growing up, which is insane, because that's what everything that you do that matters, for the most part, is riding on how you physically show up in the world. That sounds like a little bit much, but think, if you lose your health, nothing matters. Like you the moment that you lose, there's like a healthy man has many dreams, but an unhealthy man only has one. Like the moment you lose that, like, that's it. Your whole life focus becomes getting your health back. And we don't think about that because we just take it for granted. But in my opinion, I think your opinion, it ought to be something that is instilled in us from a very young age. It's a part of who we are. It's not something that we wait to be fixed at some point when it's too late.
And the extent to which we do think about our physicality, our culture tells us that, you should exercise, numbers about a certain number of minutes, a certain number of times per week. But there's not much thought about all the other minutes and about just how we're managing our body throughout our days. That's what I like about your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, so that's not just my work. I'm like piggybacking on all sorts of people. So James Levine he's one of the main researchers around this sedentary lifestyle and what that does to us. And one of the terms that I gathered from him was NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And what that is all of the extra calories that we potentially could be burning throughout the day. Not that life is just about burning calories, but just being more metabolically efficient through taking our body through a more regular range of motion, through doing simple things like, I don't know, washing your dishes, or being intentional with how you pick something up off of the ground. Or, one of the principles in the book, the 5 movement principles, is just spending more time on the ground, which I know that this as a rock climber. Like if you're hanging out, like it would be a very strange scene for you to go to a crag and like bring a bunch of chairs for your buddies. Like like it would be like, who are these people? And so you go and you sit on a rock and you find a different position, and then you twist and you turn, and then you get up, and then, maybe you have a snuggle with a friend for a little bit. Then you go back and you're like, that's who you are. That's the foundation of your humanity. It's the beginning of ever. And
it's funny. I just laundered some clothes, and I had a new pair of jeans that was completely shredded because I took a friend to Sedona a few days ago, and I wanted to take him up a quick route near Bell Rock, and so we're doing some chimneying on the descent. And there was a point where he hadn't done a whole lot in the vertical world, so I was just taking it easy and waiting for him. And I found this spot where I was halfway down this chimney, and I had my butt, my back on one wall, my feet on the other. And I leaned back and I said, dude, this is like a lazy boy. I am so comfortable. Yes. Take your time. I'll just hang out.
And that's the thing is life is a lazy boy if you know how to fit, if you know how to fit inside of yourself. And so we don't know how to fit. Like what we don't understand, when you start to create enough adaptation through filling in all of these various nooks and crannies of our movement matrix, then you are more like in jiu-jitsu, you want to be like a wet blanket. So when you are on a person, I want to just be able to lay my weight into you and just feel like, wow, like you're 215 pounds, but you feel like you're like almost 400. Like, how do you do that? And it's because we can, if we cultivate it and pay some attention to it, it really all starts with attention. This is all meditation stuff. So if we bring that attention into our physical experience, then all of a sudden we can start to learn how to create a little bit more adaptation in all of the joints. And then you can sit on the edge of a brick or on the edge of a rock or sit in a chimney, and your body is flexible enough and your mind is flexible enough that you're able to find comfort in that space. For the most part, people are like, we have become rigid. The second chapter of the book is rigidity tends to break. Play may save your brain and body. So when we have that rigidity, and I think the first was I start off like quoting Bruce Lee and talking about fitting into the, be like water, fit into the cup. And, the sapling tree that's green can bend in the wind, and then the hard, stiff stick, that's the thing that if with enough pressure, it cracks and breaks. And so when we were looking, this is kind of maybe a jump, I don't think it is at all actually, going into someone maybe having anxiety attacks or depressions or anxiety, or just consistent anxiety, or, weight issues, or any of these different things that we wouldn't necessarily correlate. If we feel uncomfortable in our minds and our bodies and feel like we're kind of at the edge of cracking, I think that we can draw back and find more suppleness from just the way that we associate to life from a physical perspective. And that kind of trickles up and down into the way that we feel beyond that. I know that's kind of like a little bit of a meta jump, but I think it's interesting.
No. And I think about all the ways in which we try to gain comfort. And we talk about how making a more ergonomic environment and getting just the right bed, just the right cushioning, and your work, there's nothing wrong with that, but your work is saying that that's all external, and there's internal tools that may be even more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about more important, but equally important at least. And so that's the thing is like, like Einstein, he has a quote where he says that the field is contained and or the particle is contained and regulated by the field. So it's like you and I were the particle, and then we're in this field that is our bed, or you're in that chimney rock climbing, or you're sitting in a cold plunge, or taking a cold shower, or a hot shower, or a hot tub. And you become that, you're shifted by that. And then you can go the other direction and say, okay, well, I'm going to go in and find contentment and equanimity and all those things from the inside, so that I have greater control of this experience, as opposed to me just purely being at the whim of external factors. And then, sure enough, as you start to cultivate that, what you will typically find is the external world becomes more pleasant, and all of a sudden there's more positive things attracted to you, because people like to be around people that are at home in themselves. People like to be around people that are on purpose. People like to be around people that are adaptable and flexible. And you can take them to, like, I throw these like dinner party things every month. And if we invite somebody, which it hasn't happened yet, but if we invite somebody that they're not like a good time, then it's like, well, you're just not going to get invited back. like, no matter what the situation, if we go camping, it's like, yeah, we went camping and it just rained the whole time. And then it hailed, and we got chased by a bear. It's like, yes, those things happened, and your experience is all on you. So if you can start to cultivate that, then yeah, drawing back to like the anxiety, depression, and all these kind of uncomfortable sensations, I think we can go the other direction and start from the inside and kind of change our filter on things.
We'll be right back after a word from Integrative Health.
We hope you are enjoying this episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. This is Dr. Turner at Integrative Healthcare. So often we hear from our new patients that their primary care physician has told them that their thyroid and hormone levels are fine, and they should not worry. Yet the patients still have symptoms of severe fatigue, thinning hair, and weight issues. Unfortunately, this is too common with thyroid care. The good news is we can help, and there is hope. The doctors at Integrative Health, including myself, specialize in naturally treating thyroid, hormone, and adrenal issues. We would love to get you started on the path to ideal health. From the comfort of your own home, you can get treatment with one of the doctors at Integrative Health via telemedicine. Go to integrativehealthcare.com to become a new patient today. Use code PODCAST20 for 20% off your new patient visit. Again, that is integrativehealthcare.com, and use code PODCAST20. Get back on the road to thriving.
And now, back for more medical myths, legends, and fairy tales. To talk more about the book here and how someone can really integrate that into their lives. I think many people they're probably close to what their scheduled comfort threshold is for physical activity. If they're doing a lot or little, whatever it is, they're probably bucking up against their interest limits. So one thing I liked about the book too is that it's not so much, here's the exercise you're already probably not doing as much as you should, but here's another hour's worth a day of things to stack on top of that.
Yeah.
It's more so a matter of the movement that you will inevitably do. Here's how you can do that in ways that will serve you better.
That's exactly what the book is. And, there's like the what is it called? Counterclockwise is the book I'm spacing her name, but I had her on my podcast. You might know her name. She's Ellen Langer is a psychologist from Harvard, and she had a study called the MAIDS study, and it was really popular. And she had one group of maids they were told how, oh, by the way, as you're doing all your duties, you are actually burning lots of calories, and you're like strengthening your muscles, and like you're like doing some fitness while you're sweeping and cleaning those dishes and going up and down those stairs. Like you're like an athlete. And so they plant that seed inside of those people. It's like, yeah, you're right. I am like an athlete, which they are, like, absolutely, compared to someone that just sits in front of a computer all day. And then the other group, they just didn't mention any of that. And what they found by just planting that seed of awareness that what I'm doing matters and is a part of my fitness, all of a sudden they end up decreasing fat more effectively and gaining muscle, and their blood pressure drops, and like all this cool stuff happens inside of them at a cellular level, just based off of planting that seed of attention. And so throughout our days, for the most part, our attention is pirated away from us from advertisements and social media and emails and texts, and everyone is vying for your attention. It's the most valuable commodity that most of us have. We just don't realize it because we think we're getting free lunches by being on social media. But it's like, no. The reason that app is free is because there's people making lots of money off your attention right now. And so if you can draw that attention back into this physical experience by doing something like paying attention to while you wash your dishes. There's been other, I won't just quote studies the whole time, but there's another study we mentioned in the book of by bringing attention into the way that you're standing as you're washing dishes and the temperature of the water in your hands and the bubbles and all that stuff, it ends up increasing people's creativity and decreasing levels of anxiety just by bringing that attention into that experience. So if we have the mechanical fundamentals of like the how-to guide of first, like, am I doing it right? I think that's a primary issue is a high percentage of people just don't know if we're doing it right. And so am I picking that up right? If I were to like rock climb, like would I hurt myself? Like I don't know what's the best position for my elbows and my shoulders and my hips. If I wrestled my buddy randomly, I'm a grown man and we're wrestling on the grass in the park. Like that's crazy. I don't want to do that because I don't want to injure myself because I don't know if I'll do it right. But if we have those fundamental mechanical principles outlined, which is exactly what we did in the book, and we can bring a little bit of intention and attention into our daily life along with those principles, it's the fountain of youth. If you can bring that awareness into yourself on a momentary awareness or momentary day-by-day basis, you don't just all of a sudden become 60 or 70 and just get old. Like it is a gradual process. And as we disassociate or disconnect from that awareness of being in our body, then that chasm gets larger and larger and larger until eventually we can't make the jump anymore. And then it's like, oh, I've fallen and I can't get up. Like I've lost autonomy in my body to the point that I literally can't get up off of the ground. That's not a thing that just happens because it's your 67th birthday. That is something that was a slow, gradual process, and the seed was planted many years ago.
And just to pull this really quick, just something I just mentioned to the readers, I wrote here a few days ago about how we're coming up on the end of a decade, and how do you want to be? What do you want your physical experience to be as we finish up the next decade? Think ahead 10 years, and how do you want to be moving and feeling when we're in December of 2029? And that's something that the small things you do now can completely shift that. And I think this work could be an important, valuable part of achieving those goals.
Absolutely, man. I love that. I appreciate that. And that's like, if your home, if you leave your house long enough, eventually, it depends on the state or the city, but like squatters can come in and occupy that space. It's like, no, like you're not in your house anymore. Like somebody needs to live in it. And if you're not in your physical house, in your, awareness of activating your hips correctly and your pelvic floor muscles and the muscles in your back and your feet. The fact that we're wearing these like cushioned foot coffins all the time is like, it's really fascinating. You have 7,000 nerve endings in each foot, and they're there because they're detecting your location in space, and they're sending information up into your low back. And when you cut that off, speaking of like back pain and whatnot, there has been correlations of foot issues to back pain. So when you cut that off, then it's like you're cutting off a primary conduit of your sensory experience. You're just shutting that highway down. And now all of a sudden, everything kind of feels like a cushion. And so when everything feels like a cushion long enough, eventually your body, it craves adaptation. And if you pull that out long enough, that's, I think, when disaster ensues. If we have these little micro traumas consistently throughout our life, little micro battles in the form of like, ooh, that root was a little sharp in my foot. Or like, ooh, I think I almost fell there, but I caught it. I saved it. Or, oh, I did fall, but it was a learning experience because I learned how to fall safely. if you have that with regularity, then your body's always learning, it's always adapting, it's becoming a strong, robust organism that will be safe and autonomous all the way through its life. But if you take those little micro traumas out and put yourself into a cushioned coffin, essentially, then you're asking for nuclear warfare at some point.
So the book is about 5 movement principles. And how would someone really plan to integrate that? Like, how long will they expect to get these things down? Do you revisit these things on a regular basis? I mean, how do you live with this material best?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's so in the introduction of the book, we have an analogy of life is like a golfer swinging your club at a golf ball, and if the face of that club is off ever so slightly, then you won't notice the difference right away. But after 50 yards, 100 yards, you'll notice this really huge difference. You'll be like, oh, okay, wow, the ball's on the green or the ball's in the sand or whatever. Those momentary decisions throughout the day, they'll notice you'll have effect. Like, you will have immediate effect from everything we break down in the book, and you'll have huge effect in 6 months, 2 years, 10 years. So the way that the movement principles that we lay out in the book, it's all things that you're pretty much already almost doing, but just not quite. So everything is something that, like you said, we're not adding, okay, cool, I want you to do 200 burpees and like this whole new workout program on top of all the other stuff you think you're supposed to do. This is more just looking at what you're already doing and saying, how could we almost effortlessly, and it's almost the opposite, because the effort that we're creating actually pays back greater than what we put into it. But almost effortlessly, how can we just change the shape of that club or the angle of that club ever so slightly to have huge impact? And an example of that would be like the washing of the dishes, or like the maids, paying attention to the fitness of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. And if you were at a gym paying a personal trainer, however much you pay your trainer, to tell you, cool, like we're going to pick stuff up. We're going to pick stuff up off of the ground. That's what we're going to pick stuff up. Like, that's what you do all day, but that's what at the gym you pay a couple $100 to pick up a kettlebell and pick up a barbell and do a deadlift. It's like, that's your life. You pick stuff up all day. And that trainer would say, okay, I want you to hinge from your hips. I want you to get this nice long neutral spine. I want you to stack your central nervous system, elongate that spinal cord, and get everything stacked up, integrated, aligned, so we can get the most power going through your system. All right, now we're going to use your breath. We're going to create some compression in your torso. And okay, we picked it up. Wow. And then all the way back down. Great. So that's cool that we paid so much attention to that while we were in the gym or at the martial arts studio or in the dance class. But what about can we take those same principles and bring that into our lives? So hip hinging is one of the principles that we break down in there. The other one is spending time on the ground. The other one is just hanging each day and the value of that. And then there's a couple more beyond that.
That's great. So really, if someone can work through this, get these basic ideas, integrate a couple of those, add in some more. And I would suggest for listeners and readers to make this something that you would revisit, because, a lot of our things that we want to make habitual, they will drift, and default states will take over if we don't give some ongoing input to the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then I would also recommend on top of that, like the way that we finish the book is essentially saying, like, forget about the book, so use these, and the way we start as well is like, cause it's called the aligned method. I kind of like poo on the idea of method as well, because it's like a static method. It's like Bruce Lee, same thing. It's like, there's no such thing as a static method for every situation. You want to learn flexibility. And so the aligned method is more of an approach to life. And it's something that I'm working to live into. I by no means am like up on any pedestal of like, okay, I am the aligned method, man. I'm like, no, like I essentially like wrote my Bible to follow. And I think it would be great for other people to get involved, because I think that the principles in there are all relevant for, our longevity and confidence and creativity and all of that. But then eventually we do want to get to the point where we're not living our lives from a method, and we're living our lives from our own authenticity. And we're not having this meta kind of watching ourselves hinge our hips and breathing through our noses and watching our gait pattern as we walk. And if you're always watching, think about if you're rock climbing, that's a moment. The reason that things like that are so addictive is because it's one of the few things that kind of like narrows the vision. If you have blurred vision and you're seeing yourself from this angle and that angle and that angle, the vision of your reality is kind of like you're wearing a blurred pair of glasses. But when you can bring all of that tension into that point of, okay, I got to pull in that crimp, and then, okay, I'm going to drop my knee, and then I'm going to reach up, and then I'll get, like, you don't have a meta watching component there. You are completely in the moment. And that is medicine. So if we can bring ourselves into that place, but the only reason that you can be in that moment, because when you first start rock climbing, you are not in the moment. You have a meta watchingness. You're saying, this is crazy. What am I doing here? Am I doing this right? Did I read am I following the align method? How's my hips? If you're doing that, then you're missing it and you're flailing. It's fine. Flailing is a part of learning and growing. But at some point, the goal is to forget the book. That's like a metaphor for all sorts of stuff.
One quick granular point I want to pull out for the readers as an example of what's in the book. So you talk about hanging, and in terms of our structure, we're probably still really adapted to that. You mentioned that as well, our structure and our skeleton. And you talked about how there's been a fair amount of work by at least one surgeon, how that can be a way of undoing so much chronic shoulder pain.
Yeah.
It's just having, just negative pressure, just hanging in some way on a regular basis.
Yeah, so Dr. John Kirsch is the guy you're referring to. He's an orthopedic surgeon that wrote a book called Shoulder Pain that we essentially do a very similar shoulder protocol as Kirsch. So like I said, so much of what in the beginning of the book as well, I'm like attributing the book to thousands of years of research. Like when we create a thing, it's like, cool, great, my face is on the book and my name is on the book. It's like, I didn't write the book. This is like researchers and philosophers and people like doing so much work. And then not to mention the designers and the publishers and there's so many different people involved in creating a thing. I think that's just a totally separate side tangent that's interesting. We put our name or a face on a thing and we assume that we did it, but in fact, we're just riding on the momentum, the momentum of history. So John Kirsch would be a part of that momentum. And he would see clients or patients that were coming in for shoulder surgery due to impingement and pain. And he had the crazy, wacky idea of what would happen if you did what your shoulders are clearly structured to do with regularity and that you haven't done for 6 years. Like, what would happen? I mean, maybe won't hurt to find out. And so he put them through this shoulder protocol, hanging protocol, where they're just hanging, which I'm going to do launch one on Instagram and social media this week, actually. So people, it'll be passed by.
That's cool.
Yeah, anyways. But stuff like that I think is valuable, just giving little challenges. And so she had patients go through this hanging protocol of just a minute and a half each day, broken down, and it can be 15 seconds 6 times. And I'm describing the protocol in the book as well. And what he found was that with 90% efficacy with his patients, that shoulder pain would go away if they just take their shoulders through this natural range of motion. I find the 99% like hard to believe, but that's in the book, and that was his experience. I'm like, that's fascinating. So it's just taking with anything. It's like Ida Rolf, who's the founder of Rolfing Structural Integration. She said, put the joint where it belongs, and then call for motion. So when we're working with the bodies, what we need to do is we need to put the body in its home position, or centrate the joint, be a fancy word for it, or integrate or align that joint, that connective tissue around it, and now just be there. Like your inhabitants from those positions heals your body, because your body is a self-healing mechanism. And we put far too much investment in seeking peripheral remedies to heal our body from the outside in. But in fact, like your body is built to heal itself, and so if you just give it the right container, the Einstein stuff, you put it in the right field, then such as in this case, just like reaching your arms up over your head with more regularity, and then you go bonus and actually hang off of something and decompress the spine and open up that tissue around the lungs and the ribs and the viscera. Your body says, oh yeah, I know what to do with this. And boom, we're in a better place.
Yeah, so great book. I read this cover to cover, and I've been integrating more of these movement patterns that I've been less aware of in my own life, and pleased with it. So highly recommend it for people.
Wow. That means the world, man, because I respect your work I as much or more than anyone that I've come in contact with. So that's awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, everyone. And I'll have some links out to get the book and to connect with Aaron and his work. But please reach out. We're all moving constantly, and do it by design. We're also oftentimes aware of various mind-body things that we should spend time on, and oftentimes feeling overwhelmed. But yeah, you can achieve much of the same benefits of awareness in those same movement patterns by having them be a meditation of sorts. So very powerful, lots of utility.
Yeah, I so greatly appreciate your time. And I look forward to having you back on my podcast, the Align podcast. Whenever you're back in LA, I want to make it happen for sure.
Let's do it. That was a lot of fun last time. We were hanging out on the floor and brewing up Chinese herbs.
Yeah.
And stuff. It was a rainy day sitting inside making Chinese tea. It was a lot of fun.
Right. Well, thank you, man. I so greatly appreciate your support of the book and just everything, man. I value what you are creating in the world, and it's awesome. So thank you.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I'm back with you real soon with the next episode. Hey, Dr. Christensen here. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. Is there a topic you'd like me to cover? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to Dr. Alan Christensen on Facebook or Instagram, write your question, and use the hashtag #MedicalMyths. Did you find this show helpful? If so, please take a minute and leave us a rating on iTunes so that others can know. Thanks much, and I'll be back with you real soon. Bye-bye.